Well, I found a really great out-of-print book, out of print as far as I can tell, so I want to show you some highlights of it. Covers, as you can tell, right, Early American Knives, the knife in homespun America, so it goes chronologically, and I want to focus on some great examples out of it of early American knives. I have a dual purpose here, though, because I also want to use this as an opportunity to talk about how researching weapons, this is what it was like in the old days. It was book-based, and really often it was black and white pictures of the kind that you're about to see a lot of. Nowadays you have the internet, of course, but not just that, it's these super high-def pictures. You can see collections from museums from around the world, and it's just amazing. Well, that's not how it was before, but they kind of made it really special when you did have a find like this. Like way back in the day, I just would have done a backflip to find a book like this. I highly recommend this one, but it's going to cost you about $50 if you can find a version being sold. So here's an illustration, and notice the very large knife the guy has on his side. That's the kind of thing that the beginning of the book focuses on, because you're in America, it was a frontier society, and your knife had to be a real multi-purpose tool most of the time. You get this kind of part machete, part butcher knife, part fighting knife. And you can kind of see that in this first example. Look at the blade. It's a multi-use blade. It's broad. It's got a carving type end and a point that you could at least theoretically thrust with in a fighting situation, but that was not the intended purpose. And you notice the contrast with the short pistol grip type handle and the long, broad blade. That's something, that pistol grip type handle, you'll see quite a bit back then. Now, same time period, opposite type of knife. Time period being late 1700s. This one here in particular is 1770 to 1790, or estimated as such. This one in particular, this exact specimen, was from the Ohio River Valley, which was the frontier back then, of course. And this is a fighting knife. Medial ridge, spear point blade, wicked looking knife. It's great. And could you use this as a, tool? Yes, but this is more directed towards fighting utility, whereas the last one was more of a useful tool that could be used in a fight. And that really happened a lot back in those days. You carried something that was useful day in, day out, and then when a scrap came up, it was out in your hand. This one here that was meant for fighting action has a 9 1/4 inch blade, by the way. The last two were not atypical at all for the time and place. This one definitely is. So check this out. It's got the antler pistol grip, handle, very common. One interesting feature there is notice there's just one rivet holding the tang in place. You see that there? And that's it. But, like I said, that's pretty usual. But now you get onto this almost 7-inch blade, and it's got kind of a Bowie butcher-style blade, but with this peak up there, which happens to have an eye carved in there. You see that? Very unusual for an American knife and of the time. And this also has Masonic symbols, which we're not going to be able to see here, but, the author pointed that out. And the overall effect, when you take that eye into account with then the upturned, slashing point, kind of that Bowie-style point, is you get kind of an animal head. And that's really incredible. It makes you think of traditional African weapons, especially, but overall you think of like ethnographic weaponry, where it mimics animals and whatnot, not, European, Anglo-American, American-type weapons. So really cool. Don't know who owned this. Was this more symbolic? It's a useful knife, it looks like. I would think it got used on a regular basis, but given that it has some Masonic symbols on it, does that play into the decoration here on the blade? We'll never know. Now for a mini history lesson, because here is Seth Kinman. He was born in 1815 in Pennsylvania, but in the mid-1800s, I think it was 1849, he ended up moving out west, and in California, he became a legendary trapper, mountain man, hunter, scout, that kind of thing. He was very much the real deal, right? He actually did wear buckskin, all the time, and animal fur cap and all that. You can see his trusty long rifle there, which would have been an, invaluable companion to him, but another one was his knife. And it's a great one. It's a wicked looking thing. Look at the point on that. It's wonderful. A lot of American knives were heavily influenced by the Spanish kind of navaja, which overlaps with kind of the Bowie outline. I think this one feels to me like it has that outline, that kind of Spanish-inspired one. Wicked, wicked point. It's got the, elongated Bowie type, shape. It's really stretched out, sleek weapon. It's got a false edge on the top side, so that makes that point extra efficient in the thrust, right? You can see his name engraved on there, along with something that's hard to read, but it says Grizzly Dissector. So, grizzly bears were apparently among the things that he trapped and hunted. He was so renowned for his skills that he was actually hosted at the White House under 3 different presidents. Abraham Lincoln being one of them. And you can see there's a bit of a guard, just enough to protect your finger from slipping onto the blade there, and then it's got a great kind of an eagle head handle, which is reminiscent of a lot of early American swords. This next one is from 1800 to 1815, and now you get closer to the style that you kind of expect, alright? Even though that clipped point is cut not with a curve, so it looks more like an Anglo-Saxon sax, which is an ancient knife. But this is, again, what you'd expect in terms of size. This is a 12-inch blade, 16 inches overall. It's actually got the full guard, the first one that we've seen like that, so this gets a little bit more typical, but pretty early there, so you can see that. It was already showing up in 1815. Or thereabouts. Here's another fighting knife. This one's interesting. Look at the guard there, the way it sweeps up to protect the hand. That plus the spear point blade lets you know this was meant with combat in mind. Hopefully my dual purpose is being served here. If you never did this kind of thing, reviewed this kind of book to do research or just to look up weapons because you thought they were cool, you're getting a sense of what it was like. I mean, these were the pictures and they were great. You were really excited to see this kind of thing, and they do still have a charm. This book is old and musty. It smelled great. It's tactile. So, it's a different world now. This one I really like. It's from about 1840, so a little bit later, and it's from London. This gives us a good chance to mention that most, or at least a lot, of knives in America being used in this period were from England and overseas markets, but especially England. So just the manufacturing base here wasn't that big, so that was a really common thing. A lot of the classic Bowie knives, even ones that have patriotic slogans on them, were actually made in Sheffield and other places back in the mother country that we broke away from, which is pretty funny. And if we really want to nerd out here, see the false edge on this one with that broad leaf-shaped blade? I have a Bowie knife like this, and I love these. It's very unusual, but you do see it, so I was really excited to see an example this old, utilizing it. Speaking of imports, here's a French knife, and as the book points out, this would have been common, or, fairly common along the Mississippi trade route. Back to American-made, so actually more, cruder than the last two, but no less noteworthy is this fighting knife here, fighting/hunting knife. Look at that clipped point, just super exaggerated, very deadly in a thrust, and this is the kind of look that you associate with American knives at this period. Here's an outline you definitely want to be familiar with for this time and place in American history, and there were knives like it all over the world, of course, but this is a very functional tool. You'd fight with it only if you had to, and then it would be pretty effective, as you can see. But, this is for chopping, cutting. You need to hack through some brush. It's a extra large butcher knife, could be used that way. And you're going to have this as a constant companion if you're out on the frontier. And now two great daggers. The one up above is an Indian trade dagger, so specifically made for trade with the Native Americans. And you can see it's nicely made. You see the guard is really, really wide, and it's just nice and symmetrical, not as homespun or as rough as some of the ones we've seen in this video. Meanwhile, the one on the bottom actually uses silver in the guard and elsewhere, so this is by far the highest end one we've seen in this overview. They're both from roughly the late 1700s, again, to the early, really very early, like 1815, early 1800s. So when I said Indian trade knife, you might have immediately imagined kind of the later frontier and the Wild West, that kind of thing, but no, this is from far earlier. Almost a 5-inch blade on the bottom knife and over an 8-inch blade on the top knife, by the way. So two great pieces to end on from a great old book. Pick up a copy if you can. It's certainly worth it, but there's not too many of them around. And that's how it was once upon a time. Right? Books like this were a fantastic resource, and still definitely have a charm all their own, despite all the information and pictures available online. So maybe I'll do some more from this book at some point, if people find this interesting. Thanks.